This is Adrian Warnock's Christian Podcast. Thank you for joining us. Hi, I'm Adrian Warnock, and I'm here with two people today. So that'll be an interesting one. I'm going to do an interview with two people. I've got Naomi and Mark with me from an app called Soul Time. So would you mind introducing yourselves, please, to start off with? Oh, well, I suppose who goes first? Naomi, would you mind going first? Ladies first.
Hi, I am Naomi, and I'm one of the writers and voices from Soul Time.
Hi, I'm Mark, and I'm the founder of Soul Time.
Wonderful. So let's just start then by explaining a little bit about what Soul Time is. It's something I have been using, but I'm aware that obviously maybe some of the people watching here might not have heard of it, although I understand it's becoming quite popular in some of the app spaces. So it's an app to do with meditation. Have I got that right?
Yes, absolutely.
Can you explain a bit more about it, Mark, and how it came to sort of happen?
Yeah. So the background to it was that I have been to I used to go. Oh no, I still do go to Holy Trinity Brompton, but I was involved in ministry there for a long time, and I mean, on a purely voluntary. I've never been part of the staff or anything. And we set up a little thing where we were praying for people, allowing people to come to us and pray with them in a way which is, I suppose, kind of inner healing, and trying to help people with all kinds of issues that they might have. I mean, it might be anything from insomnia, anxiety, or much more serious things sometimes. And what we found was there was a overwhelming demand. We had a year's waiting list at all points, and I started thinking, this is crazy. There must be some easier way and better way to do this. And so we started playing with little audio recordings, which covered some of the same ground, and tried those out on people, and they seemed to think those were good. And then came across a number of the secular meditation apps like Calm and Headspace, which have grown very fast and very large, and realized that there wasn't really anything in the Christian space, even though, I think the first person in recorded history to meditate is Isaac in the beginning of Genesis, and who's 1,000 years before Buddha-ish, and obviously the Psalms are almost one long meditation. So wondered if we couldn't put together a Christian meditation app. And anyway, so that was the background to it, and I raised a bit of money, and that's what we've done.
Awesome. So Naomi, how did you get involved in this app? And then we'll come into some of the details of that a little bit as well, because I think that raises a lot of questions, what you just said, Mark. So that's great.
So I was working at Holy Trinity Brompton, well, Alpha actually, at the same time Mark was there. And we just knew each other from that. I did some Alpha talks and things, and we'd always just kept in contact. So even after I left that and did a complete career change into horticulture, Mark stayed in. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I just.
What I want to know is, do you talk to your plants? Because I'm wondering if you're talking to your plants in the same way you talk to us on the app, like help the plant help them grow. I don't know. I mean, that's what Prince Charles thinks, isn't it?
Yeah, apparently that's a theory that works. I mean, yeah, why not? That was a complete career change. That's a story for another time. But Mark had always stayed in touch, and he basically said, I've started this app. We'd love you to write some things and maybe try a voice. And that went very well. So eventually I came on full time. So that's what I do now. Yeah.
And I can be a testimony to the fact that, Naomi's got this incredibly sort of calming, soothing voice when she's in her sort of meditation mode, which is great. There isn't much of the sort of the laughter and the bubbliness that I'm now catching in the interview, but she sounds like she's a professional voiceover artist, wouldn't you say, Mark?
From the moment I met Naomi, I realized that she was a significant talent, and so I was so pleased when she decided to do some little experiments, and then I discovered also, having worked with lots of different people, that Naomi has this wonderful gift of being able to do it in one take, which is she's both a very gifted writer, but also she's a great talent, a voice talent.
She's probably blushing right now, but there we go. And I should say that Naeem's not the only voice on the app, and there's plenty of other voices and plenty of material. There's a huge amount of material on the app of all kinds of different things. So this idea of meditation, let's talk a little bit more about that, because I think you mentioned that Isaac had meditated. I'm trying to remember a little bit more about that specific verse. I've forgotten that one, but there's a lot of other verses in the Bible about meditation as well, isn't there? Why do you think it is that meditation is somehow associated either with Buddhists or maybe sort of, Catholic monks, and yet it's not really that mainstream, or hasn't been that mainstream for the last couple of 100 years, really, amongst evangelicals at least? Why do you think that is?
Well, let me just give you a little tiny bit of background. There's a fascinating service that Google provide called Ngram, where you can look up the frequency with which certain words are used in all printed books. And it runs from about 1600 to the present day. And if you look at meditation, you find that it has two great spikes when it was very popular. One is in the late 17th century, so with the Puritans, and the other is in the...
Uh-oh.
Hello. Well, Naomi, you might have to jump in there. What was the other spike? Hopefully...
I have no idea.
I was on the edge of my seat there.
So was I. That was going to be gripping. I
know, because that was like the Puritans, that's interesting, because you tend to think of the Puritans as being a bit dour, don't you? And if anything, maybe not very emotional, let's say, emotionally savvy. And certainly with mindfulness and the emotional, just some of the movements around mindfulness and their approach to motion wouldn't sound like it was very consistent, not with the illusion people have had of mindfulness, but of sort of meditation and the Puritans. That's really interesting. So maybe, Mark, you can explain a little bit more why meditation and the Puritans go together, and then you can say what that second spike was, because Naomi and I don't know, and so we weren't able to hear when you just froze for a moment there. So go ahead.
Okay, so the second spike was around in the 1830s. So the sort of height of the sort of evangelical revival, sort of coming out of the Methodists at the back end of the 18th century. Anyway, and it's also, it coincides with the spike in the use of the word prayer or gospel or any of those words, if you like. But just on why, I think we have a wrong idea about the Puritans. They were extremely emotional, extremely emotionally connected. They had a very strong sense of what goes on in the heart as being something of great importance. That we think of them as being dour and I'm sure there's one end of the Puritan world which was very dour and iconoclastic and smashing things up and all that kind of stuff, but there's another end which is has a real sensitivity to inward things, to heart beliefs, to what really goes on inside at a deeper level, not just things that you believe in your head, but things that you believe in your heart. And what we've tried to do is make connections in the app with, I think, a lot of things that the therapeutic world has perhaps understood better than much of the Christian world, that the deep things that we believe about ourselves, about other people, are actually extremely important, and they affect the way we behave, the way we respond to people. They drive our emotions very often, and that understanding those things and giving space for those things and giving time to pray over and ask God questions about those things is a extremely valuable occupation of our time.
That's really, really interesting. I think we should maybe come back a little bit more to that. But early on in the interview, I did want to raise another question I had, which was around the use of the word soul. I mean, soul time as an app is quite a sort of catching word. And of course, as a psychiatrist in my own background, I don't know if you knew that, Mark. I don't normally like to tell people that when I'm interviewing them because then they get nervous. But it's a long time since I've been doing that, and I don't anymore have the power to commit you to hospital, so you're okay. That word soul obviously comes from the Greek word psyche, which is where we get the word psychiatry or psychology, and really it seems to reflect the word mind. And perhaps I was reading Derek Prince the other day, of all people, and he defined soul as being the will the intellect or the intelligence, I suppose, and the emotions. And so I guess quite closely related to the concept of the mind. So what I'm interested about is that growing up, certainly in certain of the circles I was involved with, the word soul didn't really get used much in Christian circles, except sometimes to talk about something that was soulish and somehow negative. You know, that if we did certain things, that they were being soulish and maybe a bit self-indulgent, maybe, and that really we needed to focus on our spirit. So I wondered if you could comment a little bit on that and the reasons behind your choice of the word soul, because actually, when you look at what the Bible says about soul, it does talk a lot about it. I've seen words like, you know, God wants to restore our soul, that we need to bless the Lord with all our soul. And there's an awful lot about that in the Bible as it happens that certainly for me growing up, I don't think I quite picked up on.
No, I very much like the remark that George MacDonald, the novelist, do you remember George MacDonald, who wrote the books that inspired C.S. Lewis to write fantasy? In fact, we have some of his stuff on the app. He comments that we're often taught that we are a body and we have a soul. And he says that's quite wrong. We are a soul, but we have a body. And that the soul is the essence of us. Mm-hmm. It's the deep thing. It's the thing that communicates with God. It's the heart of us. And so it's the soul time. The name was intended to communicate the idea of spending time valuing and getting to know the real us, not just the thing that we present to the outside world, but being comfortable with who we really are, who we were made to be, all of that kind of stuff.
I'd like to bring Naomi here in a little bit about that. So what has your own understanding of your soul, how has that sort of been affected over the years by some of these sort of thoughts? And do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, like I was brought up in a very kind of conservative evangelical sort of environment, which I find quite damaging, and kind of the concept of the soul for us was always something that needed saved. So that was very much the party line at that stage. And then as I kind of have got older and explored different faith traditions that really inspire me, and different writers and things, and I find it definitely much deeper than that. It's like it's not just about that. It's about your creativity is in your soul, and your connection to God that is there, and anytime you feel inspired, it's there, and it's kind of this constant thing rather than just this part of you that needs to be saved. It's like something you can experience every day in a very meaningful way, I guess.
Mm. And I did hear a example of your recording of your testimony online. So when I post this on the blog, I hope I can find it again. I shall put a link to it. But perhaps you could just talk a little bit more about how, I mean, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but I kind of got the feeling that your upbringing almost kind of crushed your soul in a way.
Yeah, it very much did. I mean, like most of these things, I'm sure it was started out of a place of sincerity and, you know, people believing that this was the right thing to do. And, you know, I've kind of learned to kind of be at peace with that aspect. But for me, it was very, very damaging, and it definitely led to a lot of mental health issues like depression and insomnia. And I remember at 12 feeling suicidal, like I wanted to die, because there was just such an emphasis on guilt and shame and this feeling that you would never be okay, and that you were expected to be perfect, and if you weren't, then, you know, there was just kind of no hope for you. And this idea that God was wrath and angry, huge emphasis on hell and all this kind of stuff. I remember reading somewhere recently that, you know, you've made God in your own image if he hates all the same people you do. And I can definitely see that the people who started that church, that God was very much like them. Like, God didn't like routine deviations, and God was very sober, and God was very kind of like the, you know, the typical Puritan kind of reputation. You know, that's what God is like, because that's what the people who started that church were like. And so if you have any sense of being different from that, then, you know, there's just something inherently wrong with you. So it's very much a struggle.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, isn't it? I mean, I was reading a verse just this morning, actually. No, yesterday, that I've often sort of wondered about. And it's a verse where St. Paul says, let me see if I can get this wording right. I'm quoting it from memory and I wasn't planning on using it. But he says something along the lines of that Christ came to save sinners, that's right, of whom I am the worst. And it's an interesting thing, because my instinct about that verse has always been to think that he was actually saying, quite literally, he was the worst sinner, because don't forget, he almost stamped out the early church. He went around murdering people. And so that quite literally, he viewed himself, and really we should probably be the same, as the worst sinner. But I've definitely heard teaching that because that phrase is prefaced by that, this is a saying that is worthy of full acceptance, that Christ Jesus died for sinners of whom I'm the worst, that actually each of us should have that view of ourselves, that because we know our own sin much more than we know the other people's sin, that we should literally think of ourselves as more evil than murderers, for example. I'm not sure that's terribly helpful or psychologically good. Is that sort of a little bit resonant with what you're talking about?
Yeah, it was definitely this idea that you were just really, really terrible. And I mean, there's, in some ways, when I write for the app, the things I've gone through really help me with the writing, because I think, okay, when I have felt like this, what would have actually helped me to hear? And so that's the stuff I speak. And also because I know I'm definitely not a perfect person even now. I feel very messy, actually. And sometimes when people write about things from a spiritual point of view, they write from a long time ago. They're like, oh, 10 years ago I was a terrible person, and this is what helped. But it's very difficult to even remember really the stuff that helped you at that time, because you're always speaking from your scars rather than your wounds. Whereas I feel like at the minute I can write quite a lot from my wounds still. And I hope that actually helps, that I can say, okay, right now I literally feel desperate, and I literally feel like I'm just make terrible decisions all the time. So what actually would I feel would help me right now? And then I can put it into the app. So in a way, it I'm not writing from a place of perfection at all, far from it. But I hope it helps other people.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I've been a Christian for a very long time, Naomi, but I'm first person to admit that I'm far, far, far from perfect. And I've had my own struggles, partly due to my health and partly just due to my own stupidity, really, and the fact that I've taken a long time to learn some basic things that I should have learned. But I do think it's important, as you say, that we don't try and pretend to be perfect. It's funny, you used the word mess. It almost made me think you'd been listening to my pastor's sermon yesterday. I was on, obviously, YouTube Live watching Jubilee Church London, which is where I come from. And actually, one of our members, a girl called Jo, you may know, because she still works, I think, for Alpha. Did you guys overlap with her, by the way? Sorry, it's just a side.
What was her surname?
Well, she changed her surname from Butcher to Soda. When she got married, Jo Butcher. No? I guess there's a lot of people that work there, but she was on the promotional side, I think. And so, anyway, well, whatever. Perhaps not. Sorry, it's a bit like HDB London. HDB is a bit like a sort of city in and of itself, isn't it? So
yeah.
It's a bit like saying, "Oh, you come from London. Do you know someone?" It's like my church, unfortunately. There's quite a lot of people there. I sometimes, in fact, it was hilarious. I was at a medical meeting, and two doctors that were both members of our church were there, and they met each other. Oh, I didn't know you were a doctor. But anyway, it happens, doesn't it? No, but anyway, just getting back to the point, one of the things Toppy said towards the end of his sermon, he'd quoted that lovely verse, "Weeping may tarry for the night, but joy comes with the morning." And he said, look, God is calling you back, no matter how much of a mess your life is. He wants to come to you in your mess and fix it. The Messiah is there in the mess. And the Lord will visit everyone who says, this is me and my mess, and I need you. And I guess that must have been the point you came to at some point, Naomi. Is that right? I mean, how did you get to that point?
Yeah, it was definitely a long process, and I had to go through very practical things like therapy for quite a number of years. I'm still in therapy now, and it's just the best thing. It really helps me. But there was kind of a lot of like childhood traumas to untangle, and and then to try and find a faith of my own. And so I very much had to untangle everything I'd been taught, which was very hard to do, because when you're indoctrinated, that is the automatic voice you hear. And oh, sorry.
Right.
Shared household during quarantine.
No, I mean, come on. You know, there's a bit of a meme these days about. I was hoping a kid was about to come in and.
Oh, if only. So there was kind of I really put everything right back to even the very question of, do I even believe God exists? And I spent quite a few years where I felt very much in a desert of, I have no idea if God exists. And that was quite a hard place to be, but I think quite necessary. And I had to do it to completely still everything in my mind. Like, I couldn't even read the Bible for about 2 years, because I had been taught it in such a aggressive way. Like, it was, you know, King James, and everything somehow came back to sin and hell and guilt. And I just found it very traumatic to read. And eventually I started with the Message. That was a really helpful and healing version of the Bible for me to read, because the tone is just completely different. And then eventually I just really listened to my gut, which was saying that there is more, that God exists, but that he is love, and he's not angry and hateful. And yeah, I guess that was the process that happened for me. And actually I read a lot of Christian mystics and contemplatives, and that really helped me very much. Is one of the reasons why I love soul time and the whole concept of mindfulness and meditation, because whenever I found it really hard to even know if I had a faith, those were the kind of things that really helped me, because they give you words when you can't find words of your own.
That's beautiful. So I'm interested in one thing actually here, Naomi, is so for me personally, I discovered mindfulness really, I mean, I was vaguely aware of it, but properly through the NHS and through a course that I was offered because I'm a cancer patient, which was quite interesting to me, of course, because, you know, some of my kind of spiritual alarms were going off, you know, because of the idea of Buddhism. But this was a secular mindfulness course. So they tried to take what, for most people, they see mindfulness as an outgrowth of Buddhism, and they don't see the link to ancient Christianity. In fact, because many of the concepts are entirely the same as what you can see if you look at the Psalms and if you look at some of these scriptures. So my route into a lot of this really was through that course that I did. And I found it very difficult at the beginning, but I found it very helpful. And so I'm wondering for you, were you sort of also drinking at some of the kind of, you know, outside of the church wells as well that led you in that direction? Or did you find sort of some of these ideas through these writers that you read initially?
I think initially it would have been definitely from outside of the church things, because I found things to do with the church just very stressful. I still find the church quite a difficult place to be, but I've learned to try and get the good out of it. But there was a lot of apps I used, like all the ones that are almost like our main rivals, like Calm, Headspace, all these ones I was on, and even little ones that help you breathe. Like there's one called Insight Timer, where it just gives you a little ding to breathe in and a little ding to breathe out. But then it was also Christian writers that I really loved, people like Barbara Brown Taylor and even Brené Brown now. They're just all so great at helping you be in the present moment. And so I kind of did a mixture of both of those things. But then there are some Christian apps that I this is before I started working for Soul Time, that sometimes I didn't find very helpful, because I felt like they kind of have they have a belief lane that they're trying to pull you down. And I personally just prefer something that's more open, more questions than answers. And personally, that's what I try and incorporate when I write for Soul Time. I try and make it more open, and yeah.
It does come from a kind of Christian kind of philosophy and background, doesn't it, Soul Time? Very much, I would say.
Sure.
Yeah, which is good. So, but it almost feels like there's a bit of a movement afoot with yourself, people like the Christian mindfulness guy who I've interviewed here before, and some other people around trying to sort of recapture some of these things. But I'm conscious that we've, you know, left Mark out for a little bit now. It's one of the things, being an interviewer with two people is tricky, because I mean, I feel like I've got about 1,000 other questions I'd like to ask you. So Naomi, maybe I'll just come back to you in a minute, but ask Mark to perhaps take up some of the thoughts you've just mentioned about breath being in the moment, breathing, all of these things. What some people are probably listening and thinking, what on earth is that about? What's the point of all of that?
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, we have a sort of a bit of a range on the app. I mean, for me personally, I personally don't find those things particularly helpful, and we don't make a big deal about those on the app. I mean, for me, the sort of the distinction between, I think taking time is very important, and trying to come away from sort of rushing thoughts and all of that, and all of that's very helpful. And to some extent, breathing is just a helpful thing, just to breathe more slowly. We say jokingly, when someone's in a having a bit of a stressful moment, we say to one another, breathe, just take a moment, but I think that's about as far as I go with it personally. I mean, other people can, find it more of an exercise. But I think the idea of is really to try and, that psalm, I have stilled and quieted my soul like a weaned child. It's very much that sort of idea, is to still and quiet one's soul, because it's difficult to listen to one's heart. It's difficult to find out. The heart is deceitful, and it's hard to understand. And it takes time and emotional energy to be honest with ourselves and to listen clearly to ourselves and to ask God questions about what's going on and how we're thinking and believing and, all of those things.
Yeah, so maybe Naomi can talk a little bit more about it from the perspective perhaps of somebody who is, who was rather, maybe sometimes still is, I don't know, but much more kind of emotionally in that turmoil. Because I know for me that was the thing where you're living both in the past of, oh my gosh, what's happened to me? I remember for me, I've lost my health, I can't work anymore. Oh my gosh, what's happening? But also in the future, thinking, what if things don't go as well as I hope they will for me? Will I ever be able to work again? What's my future look like? And for me, because my mind was so anxious and overstimulated, I found, and still sometimes find actually, that the breathing thing was absolutely crucial. And I wonder if perhaps you might be a little bit like me in that regard, Naomi, and could elaborate a bit more on that for you personally, because I guess it won't work for everybody, but for some people it might be really crucial.
Yeah, I'm definitely with you on that. Like, I'm still, it's not a past thing for me to be in turmoil. I'm still very much in turmoil.
Yeah, me too. Me too. And we'll be in turmoil together, Naomi. How about that?
That sounds great. Yeah, there were definitely times. I remember a few years ago, just before I switched to horticulture, it was one of the reasons I did, when I was really, really, really burnt out and stressed, and I couldn't even listen to podcasts or spoken meditations because it just required too much energy even to do that. So that was when the breathing apps, they were literally just breathing apps. You just watched a picture that said breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. That was it. And sometimes I would do that. I would have to go to the bathroom at work every 20 minutes to do that. And it sounds like such an obvious thing to breathe, but it was the only thing that would pull me out of my head or anxiety or stress. And also, obviously, it's been scientifically proven that taking deep breaths actually calms down your nervous system, calms down your emotions. So it's an actual real thing. But there's obviously certain strains of Christians find the concept of breathing just really they fall off their chair and gasp in horror, oh, breathe, oh no, it's terrible. And those people, I think, it's okay to breathe, it's okay to breathe.
It's interesting, isn't it? Actually, the Bible word spirit is actually pneuma, and it means breath. And when we first hear about man, it says that God breathed into man. And so he became a soul, which is quite interesting. We could spend a lot of time on that verse alone, with the metaphysics of the spirit and the soul and the body, which is perhaps not the place for that in this podcast. But this idea of God giving us every breath, let every breath praise the Lord. And this idea that, each day has enough trouble of its own, Jesus talks about. So there's something about being in that moment and taking that breath in and that breath out, it helps you to anchor yourself in the moment rather than the past and the present. I mean, you talked about being in the moment. Maybe you could explain a little bit more about that.
Yes. So on the app, I didn't write it, somebody else wrote it, but someone else on the team who has very bad anxiety as well, she wrote a really helpful meditation for literally just when you're in the midst of a panic attack or anxiety, which I was able to record then. And even something like that I find really, really helpful. And it's not like
what that one's called, Naomi, sorry.
Do you remember what it's called, Mark? We'll look it up and let you know.
Yeah, what we'll do is we'll look it up and we'll put we'll mention it in the comment on my blog. And if by the way, just as a for anyone listening to this on Facebook or somewhere outside of my blog, like in the podcast form, if you go to adrianwarnock.com, you'll see the post for the article version of this, and there'll be links to the Soul Time app, to Naomi's testimony, and we'll mention the specific meditations that we've highlighted here. So yeah, go ahead, Naomi, carry on.
Because when anyone who's experienced that kind of sensation knows that you can't listen to a 15-minute meditation that goes deep into the heart of, you literally just need help to calm in that moment and to breathe. And so for that one, I think that exercise had the 5 4 3 2 1 method, which is where you pick 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 you literally are just trying to focus on things around you, and that's a really immediate kind of emergency way of trying to get out of your head. And then we have the little 4-minute daily meditations, which I write and record. And I personally really actually love those. I almost always write about what I'm experiencing. So sometimes I'll get a little gentle nudge from Mark saying, they've been very negative this month. Try and be more positive. Because I'll be like, everything is hard. Like when life is hard, you just need to focus on the positive. And Mark's like, well, not everyone is finding life hard.
Someone did say that life is suffering. That's what life is.
That's probably my motto.
Actually, maybe at the moment, maybe more people probably agree with you. I mean, I had a discussion with someone yesterday who was saying, probably lots of people are finding it really hard at the moment. And I said, I wonder if it's not true to say that maybe everyone's finding it really hard at the moment. I don't know. Maybe some super introverts aren't, but apart from that.
Well, one of the funny, interesting things we do on the app is that we have this thing called our mood tracker, which allows people to identify in a lot of detail how they're feeling every day. And we do it, how are you feeling with yourself, how are you feeling with other people, how are you feeling with God, and we have 24 different moods for each one. But what, of course, that allows us to do is to then aggregate all our users and see how everybody's feeling. And what's fascinating is to see how, the moods basically sort of went along up and down, up and down, up and down. And then about a week after lockdown started, they really plummeted. And then not this weekend, but the weekend before, they went up a bit. And I think people were starting to get a bit hopeful. What's fascinating is over the last week, they've gone right down to a new low. And I mean, I'm just looking at the graph now. It's bounced up a little bit this morning, not a huge amount, but a little bit today. But I mean, we can now see in real time how people are feeling, which is kind of helpful. And we use the mood tracker to suggest stuff to people in the app, so that we give people things that are suitable for the moods they're feeling on that particular day.
Interesting, very interesting. And sorry, Naomi, I'm conscious you're in the middle of a thought. If you still got that thought?
Yeah, sorry, I just.
No, that's great. But have you lost the thought, Naomi, or are you like me with a goldfish memory? Because that's what I'm like.
Yeah. So the daily. So we do those, and then we also have categories for if people are experiencing a certain thing and they want to be in the moment with that. So if it's trouble sleeping or all the ones I write are very melancholy. So I wrote a series on despair and a series on anger, and so all the negative ones are more my angle. But I think it just helps you in the moment.
I want to slightly challenge you at the moment here now, because I'm not quite sure I agree with this division between negative and positive. I think sometimes emotions just are. And I think, one of the things that, really struck me actually was, as a psychiatrist, I obviously, looked into a lot about the various different sort of psychological theories. And when I was training and when I was working as a psychiatrist, it's a long time since I worked in the NHS, the sort of the mindfulness movement hadn't really come on board yet. And so there was a strong emphasis on CBT, which is not a bad thing. But one of the things CBT does is it talks about negative thoughts and positive thoughts. And it's true, certain thoughts can be very negative and need to be challenged, and certain thoughts can be very positive. And we should, sometimes try and replace our negative thoughts with our positive ones. And there's even sort of scriptural support for that, the idea of taking every thought captive, the idea of, what you dwell on and all the rest of it. But when it comes to the emotions behind these thoughts, I'm less convinced these days that there's even such a thing as a negative emotion, that that our emotions just are, and there's sometimes it's a bit of a mystery why they spring up. Sometimes there's a clear reason, and it's actually very helpful for us to be able to be honest enough to identify our emotion and say, actually, do you know what, I'm feeling angry, and to find a way of recognizing that, find a way of acknowledging that to yourself even, and then maybe a way of expressing it sort of to someone else if that's appropriate, or identifying it some way, and then yes, to think about it and perhaps challenge it so we don't become ruled by our emotions. But yeah, I'm not so sure.
No, I'm completely agree with you about this. So on our mood tracker, we quite deliberately have sort of half and half. I don't know how else to refer to it, but positive emotions and negative emotions. I mean, so we're deliberately trying to help people be honest. Am I feeling angry? Yes. Am I feeling despondent? Am I feeling, just irritated? Am I feeling down? Am I? But as well as I'm hopeful, I'm expectant, I'm feeling loved, I'm feeling chosen, I'm feeling, so. But it's okay to be anywhere on the board. You don't have to be one side or the other side, because I think you're completely right that the more negative feelings often tell us more about that there's something going on inside us that's worth investigating and worth looking at and worth understanding more. Where is this coming from? Why do I feel like this? It's, the emotions are there for a reason. They're there to help us understand ourselves.
Yeah, I would say they convey a message to us, but they're not supposed to dictate to us. So it's a piece of data that we need to look at and then somehow rise above a little bit, and rather than deny them. I think for me, I had so much anxiety, so much disappointment, so much anger, and I was trying to be the good Christian and also, the good CBT person, if you like, and suppress it all, push it all down. And so for me, when I first got involved in the mindfulness thing and did something called a body scan, I don't know if you've ever done one of those, Naomi.
Yeah, I have. Yeah.
I found that an incredibly distressing experience, because as I was going through my body scan, I was thinking about every part of the body that had failed me, in various different ways, including obviously my bone marrow, where the problem started from, but my throat, where I'd have to have an operation, and and it almost felt like I had become quite angry with my body. And so it was very interesting, because that actually was quite an important moment for me to just begin to stop suppressing those emotions and actually start to live with them. Is that something you relate to as well, Naomi? And how would you go about it for yourself? Someone, let's just imagine for a moment, and you can perhaps link to your own experience for this. If someone's watching this and they are in that moment of feeling super anxious, super angry maybe, or whatever, and trying to desperately push it down, but it keeps pushing up, and it's like the alarm bell. The more you ignore it, the louder it gets sometimes. So what would you suggest?
Yeah, so I've done quite a lot of CBT myself, actually, for trichotillomania, which is like hair pulling. It's one of the reasons my hair is shaved currently, trying to manage that. And I think you're right about CBT. It definitely has that kind of idea of labeling emotions as negative and positive, which is not always helpful, actually. And in some ways, it was a really useful form of therapy, because it kind of feels quite manageable. But one of the good things it did teach me is having self-compassion, because it's something I am not good at all. I think I probably have a lot of self-hatred, actually. And that comes out in various forms of self-harm, which the hair pulling is one, and then other actual self-harm methods, and also making bad choices or being in relationships you shouldn't be in, all as ways of like harming yourself. And that's definitely something that I really have to make myself do. And it could be still childhood scars of being taught that you're a hateful creature, that I'm still trying to undo. But when I feel really overwhelmed, the things that have helped me are, the body scan used to just make me fall asleep. So
I know, but that's really good, isn't it? I mean, that's that's the really weird thing for me. Whereas at first it made me really become like a madman. And I actually, the first time I did it, I almost imagined parts of the body arguing with each other and saying, it's all your fault, you know? Like my knee was almost speaking to the rest of the body and say, you thought we were a problem a few years ago because I had an operation there. It's the rest of you that's let us down. We're all right, you know, and all of this stuff. It was awful. But actually, once I'd done it a few times, I found exactly that. And that was helpful because I couldn't sleep. So I must admit, for a little while, I was just using the body scan as a way to help me sleep at night. And still, sometimes I might do that if I needed to. But carry on, Naomi.
Yeah, actually, we should put a body scan on the app. That's quite a good idea. And where you just go through all your parts of your body and try and relax them. And yeah, so it used to send me to sleep. And actually, going to sleep is something when I am very, very distressed, to the point of actually wanting to die. Sometimes sleeping is actually the best thing for me to do, actually, because it just immediately, and if you're that distressed, you do get to a point where you just fall asleep because you've literally exhausted all your emotions and all your physical energy. But when you're in the opposite end to that, when you're in highly strong anxiety, panic stage, there's a few things that have helped me. So I remember a couple of years ago being in a really bad state, and I again, this was before Soul Time, and I went on, I think it was Headspace, and I found the shortest possible meditation they had, which was 8 minutes, I think it was at the time, and that was all I could listen to. I couldn't listen to more than 8 minutes, but I just went in the bath, put on this 8 minutes, and just tried to listen to every single word it was saying. And it was one of the mindfulness ones where you observe your thoughts and just let them go. Like, you don't follow a thought, you know, you just say, okay, this is what I'm thinking. And they had a very self-compassionate phrase, which was, you know, the idea of mindfulness is you're trying not to get lost in the rabbit hole of your mind. You're just trying to be in this moment. And they were saying, if a distracting thought comes, that's okay. They're like, don't beat yourself up about it. Don't think, oh, now I've lost my concentration. And, you know, you just accept it and then let it go, and then try and bring yourself back to, you know, being calm again. And then if another thought comes in, you just let it go. And sometimes that was all I could manage. Sometimes all I could manage was the breathing apps we talked about before. And then sometimes if I wasn't feeling too all over the place, I could manage to do some actual meditations where I could listen and try and concentrate on what was going on. At the moment, I'm finding running really helpful. Finally, having one moment of exercise a day is actually working, because I'm like, yes, now I can just get out of the house, and I'm actually doing it, and I'm finding that really helpful.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because one of the things for me, for example, was that I found that worship and going to church was very, very difficult at some points during my journey. Because, you know, especially at the beginning, because the church I go to anyway, it normally starts with a really sort of rousing, celebratory type of song, you know, upbeat, up-tempo. Maybe even some people might be dancing or jigging a little bit, you know, not majorly so, but it's a very mixed church. We've got a lot of Africans there, as well as English people and people from all over the world, really. So it's very lively, but also very positive. And I'm sitting there at that point, and even today, really, I wasn't able to stand, or not for more than a few seconds. You know, too exhausting for me to even stand up, and too exhausting for me to concentrate. And hearing everyone else so happy, I just thought, oh, great, you know. So I found that kind of stuff didn't really help me, and I was really struggling, as you were talking about, to read the Bible or to worship. But what I did do quite early on, as I was beginning to get on top of some of these things, is I found a few songs that helped me. And they were often songs written out of the Psalms, because the Psalms are often dealing with these deep emotions, and or songs that people had written when they were really struggling. And there were also songs that would take you back to hope. I mean, so one that's more recent, that I think wasn't around at that time, was a song that we actually ended the church with on Sunday, which is the one that goes, "I am not alone," you know, and it's based out of Psalm 23. I don't know if you know that one at all. And that sort of song, you know, can make you cry. And there was always, you know, and there was always those one or two. So I produced a playlist, which I called Hope Worship. And it was worship that I didn't have anything up tempo in it. That was one of the things, because that was what really annoyed me at the time. But I did have things that had the gospel in it, and that, you know, was maybe a bit more melancholy. I mean, Mark might have thought my list was negative. I don't know.
Hey, you should have a look on. I mean, on the app, we have all the. We don't have any up tempo stuff on the app.
Fair enough. But what was interesting was that for me, I then eventually got to the point where listening to some of those songs, and actually not just having them on in the background, but actually focusing on them, maybe even singing them, it became like a form of meditation for me. And it made me think that perhaps for some Christians who are more together than I might be, you know, worship can actually act as a form of meditation. And maybe some people find prayer really easy, and that can be a form of meditation. But for me, I've had to learn that, and I've had to learn that through some of the sort of tools you're talking about. That being able to still and to quiet your soul. Or, you know, we mentioned that Psalm 131 it is, and then also the one that talks about, you know, be still and know that I am God. You know, quietening yourself down. Toppy, my pastor, also said something recently. He said, "Look, without solitude, you'll never hear God." So in a way, right now, we've got that opportunity. People have got time. They can't say, "I don't have time anymore." Well, maybe not some of the people who are out there, you know, serving us in hospitals and such like. But for many of us, we're shut in. And at the very least, even if we're still working from home, we have our commute time and we have our own space. And it's almost like we can put aside the pressures and the turmoil of the world and see this as an opportunity to do some soul work. And so that's why I think it's great that you've added some materials that will help specifically at this time.
I totally get what you're saying about church. It's a bit of an introvert's nightmare sometimes, because it's very loud, and then, you know, if you go to Anglican churches and you have to do the peace, sometimes you're just not in the mood to touch someone or talk to someone. You just want to be alone. But sometimes church is a really beautiful place, and sometimes I really enjoyed more smaller kind of contemplative kind of services. But actually, I've just thought of a new thing that's been helping me. So I've been having another life crisis in the last few weeks. And I was saying to Mark, "I'm so sorry, I'm always bringing drama." And he was like, "It's fine. This is what we love and expect from you." And there's actually been a new thing that's been really helping me over the last few weeks, which I've just remembered. And I'm normally very bad at being disciplined, and it's probably one of the reasons I can be so messy in my life. But I have a book called Celtic Prayer from the Northumbria community, which I am absolutely loving. And I have been finding myself actually having a quiet time every morning for the last 3 weeks, which has never been something I've been able to routinely do. And they have just a little verse from the Psalms, the Old Testament and the New Testament to read, and then some nice little thoughts, and then you can do some liturgical praying and things.
Oh, wow.
And I have
you know what, Amy? I'm feeling a new series for Soul Time. I mean, presumably out of copyright by now, because it's from the last century, and it might be a way of introducing some people to some of the old writings, because I tell you, I think it's interesting actually. Just I'm reflecting all of a sudden back to what Mark said right at the beginning of this interview, when he talked about the different times when this had become real, which were also the times when people's faith was very real, when it was a very spiritual time, when the Holy Spirit was moving in revival, and you know, that idea of restoring and reviving and getting deep in your relationship with God, getting serious with God, even as a Christian, weeping maybe, if that's appropriate, is something that, you know, seems to also coincide with revival. So, you know, perhaps, and I remember Lloyd Jones saying that, you know, revival isn't just something that happens to the world at certain times, it's something that you can do as an individual. So it sounds to me like that ancient stuff is reviving you, Naomi. Am I elaborating? Am I overstating that, or is that about right?
No, very much. I remember because I was brought up in a faith tradition that was very anti-liturgy and kind of anything Anglican like that, and but I remember the first time I really realized the beauty of that aspect, and it was an Anglican priest who said the thing that's so beautiful about well, he said every church does liturgy, whether they acknowledge it or not. So, your, Free Baptist, they will do hymn, prayer, sermon, hymn, prayer. And that is liturgy. He was like, it's the exact same format every week. And he's like, but the thing about, say, the ancient liturgies is that every single word has been crafted so carefully. Every word has been chosen so carefully. And when you say it, so for example, when you do the midday prayer or the morning prayer, you're joining with hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people who have said those exact words throughout history and at this exact moment. And there was just something so incredibly beautiful about that when you feel alone, the actual words you're saying have been spoken by people who are also feeling anguish, who are also feeling distressed, who don't feel like God exists, or having a dark night of the soul, that you're not alone. And there's just something so beautiful about that.
Yeah, I guess that's where some of those songs that I was talking about that's in my playlist helped as well, because I knew the backstory to some of those songs, like there's that beautiful one, It Is Well With My Soul, which has been also released in some more modern versions as well recently, from the guys at New Day, did one particularly. And the guy who wrote that, his two of his children had just died in a storm, and he'd also lost his business. And he was on his way back, and I think a message got to him, across the Atlantic, that when he got to England, he'd been in America, he was going to be meeting his wife alone. I think she said she'd survived alone, And then he writes, It Is Well With My Soul. And when you actually read the words, you understand it in a different kind of way than you might sort of do, that this is something that is a struggle for him. It's not a sort of easy plaster Christian grin, I'm fine, it's well with me, which is the way some people might interpret it. It was a much more of a kind of saying, look, two things are simultaneously true here. My life has just fallen apart and I'm in distress, but I'm also not cast down completely. I'm also still have a hope. So I don't know. So it sounds very interesting. I'd be very grateful if you could at least send us the name of that book so that I can also refer to it down below if you're watching on the
and of course we have, fun enough, It Is Well With My Soul was one of the first hymns we put on the app, so we have many of those great contemplative hymns which we've done in meditational versions.
Yeah, it's wonderful. So one of the questions I've got for you, Naomi, a little bit of a cheeky one, really. Sorry, I'm just warning you. There is a new tool which we haven't talked about, which we probably should, because I know it's definitely something that could be very useful for some people, I'm sure. And that is that you have the option, and it is an option, I stress, that with this emotion tracker that Mark was talking about, it asks you if you want to list a couple of people that will be sent a message to ring you if you're having a bad day. Now, they don't get to hear what you've said or why it is you think you've had a bad day, but the idea is that you have a couple of friends, and I think Marcus described it to me a little bit like having a sponsor almost, that would get a message and that would say, Naomi's having a bad day today, I better give her a call. And I guess it's particularly helpful perhaps for the sort of person who I'm not, because I mean, if I'm having a bad day, I might well just pick up the phone myself. But I guess there have been times, actually thinking about it, when I haven't felt like picking up the phone, and when I might have welcomed somebody calling that. So I'm guessing. So I guess my question for you is, and of course, some people would find it helpful and some people wouldn't. So this is this is not a right or wrong answer, and I'm sure Mark won't be telling you off afterwards. But do you think that tool would have helped you personally at some of your worst points, or even now at some of your worst points, that it might be helpful or not?
Yeah, because I think sometimes if you get so low, you don't even reach out to people. Like you feel like you're a burden, or sometimes it's just very even difficult to have the perspective that you're actually as bad as you think. Whereas if the app can pick up, actually, you've had 6 days in a row where you've said you feel utterly despairing, then that's quite a good way of being self-aware. And I definitely know that the times when someone has called me have really lifted me. And if in a moment of sensible thinking, you can think, oh, that sounds like a nice feature, I'll add that in. And then maybe if a few months down the line you are feeling very low, you get a call and suddenly you have the benefits of the thing you put in place when you were actually feeling okay. Because I think when you're feeling low, sometimes it's very hard to make good decisions or to know what you actually need. So yeah, I kind of went through a change with reaching out to friends, where for the first number of years of my adult life, I didn't reach out to people and I kept everything inside. And then I really learned to, I mean, I've probably overshared at many points in my life. I've probably gone too far the other way. But I think I'm quite good at saying to people, I'm struggling with this, but I've gone through a big process to get there. Whereas I think there's certain people and maybe certain generations that find it very hard to reach out and trouble people with their worries. And actually, even if this just makes you think, actually, it's okay to let people know. And I think actually that's one of the really nice things about quarantine right now, is that everybody is in the same boat and everyone will understand. It's a really unique situation all around the world, where if you call a friend and say, I'm finding this really hard, chances are they'll say, oh yeah, me too. And then you can have a nice conversation.
That's the thing, isn't it? Because I mean, so for me personally, even broader than just, I mean, because I've been partially self-isolated for 3 years, really. Obviously not to the sort of full extent, not able to work at all for well over 2 years. And for a few months even before that, it was really, I was only able to do a little bit from home. I probably should have stopped sooner than I did, to be honest. And very worried about washing my hands and, you know, and not catching infections and, you know, people coughing around me. And, you know, sometimes people thought I was being paranoid. Now, of course, it's welcome to my world, everyone else. Do you know what I mean? I think that, you know, for a lot of people, life was just sweet for them. And all of a sudden, they've been confronted with their own frailty and with their own mortality and with their own lack of control over our world. We like to think we can plan and have all these things in the diary. And I mean, one of my friends said that, you know, they were looking forward to a very busy March and then in April, and then sort of, oh, well, that's not going to happen then. So, I mean, yeah, I think you're right. So, I mean, I'm sure for some people, they're probably taking it quite badly, actually. So what would you say to somebody who suddenly, having, like, perhaps been very, very busy and you know, apparently successful, you know, everyone, you know, just thinks, oh, he's okay. I mean, that was very much me before my diagnosis, who's now suddenly been hit by this, or maybe something else, actually, but I'm just thinking about people who've been really hit down by this moment, and they're suddenly questioning everything. It's like, what if I die? You know, what if my family member dies? What if what if we can never work again? What if? What would you say to those sort of people?
Who are you asking, sorry?
I don't know, either of you, really. Sorry. Whoever wants to jump in, or both of you. In fact, yes, why don't we ask both of you to give your answers? How about that? Who wants to go first? Mark.
Oh, tough questions. So I think, just thinking about some of the things we've been talking about up to now, you were talking about the author of, you know, It's Well With My Soul, and there is in that an honesty about things. You know, things can be very, very hard, and life is not full of, it's not always roses and it's not always sweet smelling. That there's you know, as a friend of mine likes to say to me, life's tough, then you die. You know, there are tough things in life, and that is the truth. But that's not the whole truth. That's only part of the truth. And I think, just as we've been talking about this morning, it's a good place, though, to start by trying to understand and to put a name to what it is you're actually feeling. You know, and there's real power in that if you can put a name to what the feeling is. You know, it's not just I'm down, but I'm angry about this situation, or I'm disappointed, or I'm resentful, or I'm, you know, there's a certain, you know, there are people that I'm resentful with, or I'm resentful at God. Just being able to name those things clearly to yourself, and to have the just to know that it's okay. It doesn't matter what you're feeling. What you're feeling is, as you've been saying earlier, is what you're feeling, and that's fine. that's a really good place to start.
Naomi, can you jump in as well?
Yeah, so I definitely think lockdown and this whole situation will have brought up some really deep existential crises basically all around the world. And I think, first of all, it's really good to acknowledge that, like, if whatever you feel is okay, and you have permission to feel whatever you're feeling. And I think allowing yourself to even experience that before you try and fix it, if it even can be fixed, is really important. And I know the times where I felt crisis is the times where I've gone really deepest into my soul and my heart and my history and into God, whether it's deeply towards him or deeply away from him. It'll do an extreme reaction whichever way it is. And just to embrace whatever is happening in you. I personally am very much of the thought that God is with us wherever we are. And often I'm not a fan of suffering theories because they're often not very helpful, or they try and sugarcoat things, or they try and put a rainbow in a storm that hasn't even passed yet. But actually I'm very much with God is with us. And sometimes that's all we can say. We can't even acknowledge God is good, or God is just, or God is whatever. Sometimes it's even hard to put a characteristic on him when we feel so low. But he is there. He's on the ground with us. And whether we're on the ground because of circumstances that have happened to us or because of our own bad choices, he's there with us. And I think that is the thing that I always feel, and that somehow he can redeem everything, even if it doesn't work out how we hope or what we think or what is best, that somehow he redeems things. And I think that's always the thing I try and hold on to personally.
That's really, really beautiful. I've just had a little brainwave, okay, and I wonder, have you got your phone with you or something, Naomi, that
Yeah.
you look up 2 Corinthians chapter 4, okay, and verse 6, or I don't know, down to, where should we say? You could go on and on with this. Yeah, maybe down to verse 18. And I'm just thinking, because a lot of people won't have any idea about what soul time is going to be like, what's it like to listen to an app, and and what, the sort of the calmer voice that you put on there, which, obviously this has been quite energetic and animated, which has been wonderful for this kind of context. And I just thought it would be a really good place to end, because it was just one point that I again wanted to pick up on that you'd said, because you talked about oversharing.
Yeah.
And I think you could make that accusation of the Apostle Paul, actually, particularly in these verses where he just talks about how desperate he'd got, and yet how he hadn't completely lost hope. And so I think that perhaps, these words, I don't know if you've managed to find them since I've been waffling on, really. I was wondering if, just to sort of end this interview, you could read those words for us, and then maybe just offer a very brief prayer for us, and then we'll end there. Would that be okay?
Yeah. So 2 Corinthians 6 verse 4 and down to the end.
Yes, I think so. Well, no, let's. Do you think? Yeah, okay, from verse 4. Yeah, and then could you do that in the sort of the soul time voice?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of copyright, does there have to be a certain translation, or is anything is
No, I
NIV
don't
fine?
care. Whichever is your favourite one, it's fine.
I'll just do NIV because it's the first one that came up. Okay. As servants of God, we commend ourselves in every way, in great endurance, in troubles, hardships and distresses, in beatings, imprisonments and riots, in hard work, sleepless nights and hunger, in purity, understanding, patience and kindness, in the Holy Spirit and in sincere love, in truthful speech and in the power of God, with weapons of righteousness in the right hand and in the left, through glory and dishonor, bad report and good report, genuine yet regarded as impostors, known yet regarded as unknown, dying and yet we live on, beaten and yet not killed, sorrowful yet always rejoicing, poor yet making many rich, having nothing and yet possessing everything. We have spoken freely to you and opened wide our hearts to you. We are not withholding our affection from you, but you are withholding yours from us. As a fair exchange, I speak as to my children. Open wide your hearts also. And then I'll pray. God, thank you that you are with us wherever we are right now. Whatever feelings we're experiencing, whether it's despair or relief, a sense of being hidden in you or being exposed, we know that you are with us and you have a way of redeeming everything. Help us to come to you with whatever we have in our hands, whether they're empty or full or bleeding or rough or broken or dirty. Let us come just as we are, knowing that your soul whispers to ours and that in you we find peace. Amen.
Amen. Wow. Thank you very much for that, Naomi. I must admit that brought a couple of tears to my eyes, so it's just as well at the end of the interview now.
Bless you.
So thank you so much, Naomi, and thank you, Mark. It's been really lovely to meet you both. I had no idea that you were part of HDB, a church which I sometimes call the only church in the world where a crash is what happens between two cars outside. But yeah, but a wonderful church who's given a lot to the world, and we you know, I've been so blessed by much that's come out of your church, and obviously now your ministry here as well as Soul Time. So I commend Soul Time. Encourage you to get it. It's available, I believe, on both an iPhone and an Android. Is that right, Mark?
Correct. Yeah, that's right.
So thank you very much. Is there anything you want to just end by saying, Mark, that we've missed? Or
No. Thank you so much for your time, and it's been fun and great to talk to you.
Okay, wonderful.
Thank you so much, Adrian.
Thank you. Well, you've made it to the end of an episode of Adrian Warnock's Christian podcast. You must have some stamina. Well done. And if you liked what you heard, you know what to do. Subscribe, review, tell all your friends about it. And in the meantime, why not visit adrianwarnock.com?